In Ukraine, near the Russian border, the attacks are relentless.
People are literally living there without windows and doors in some cases. So the only one thing that is left is hope, and hope for the better.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Many feminists in Japan are feeling subdued about their first ever female prime minister.
She's not going to do anything to advance women's status in Japanese society.
Also, a former French president spends his first night in prison for his connections to Libya's Muammar Gaddafi.
It started like a love affair. It started like a honeymoon period, but it went sour.
And a big birthday for a popular cartoon dog in Italy.
Those stories and more are ahead today on The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Thank you for joining us today. There are no plans for another meeting between President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin in the immediate future. That's according to an unnamed White House official quoted in news reports today. It is a reversal because Trump said just a few days ago that he would take part in a summit with Putin hosted by Hungary.
Trump was also calling on Russia and Ukraine to stop the fighting along the existing front lines. But today, the Kremlin's top diplomat dismissed that idea. Sergei Lavrov seemed to rule out an immediate ceasefire because he said that would not address the, quote, root causes of the conflict. He also mentioned a long-standing Russian demand that Ukraine not be allowed to join NATO.
Meanwhile, the Russian military has stepped up its attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Overnight in the region of Chernihiv, Russian strikes left hundreds of thousands of people without power and some without water. Chernihiv is in the north on the border with both Russia and Belarus.
Officials there say the repair work is slow going because there's a threat of more drone strikes. Katerina Hodunova reports for the Kyiv Independent. She has been covering this story. When we spoke earlier, she began by telling us about the extent of the damage in last night's attack.
Destruction is significant, and for instance, only today, at least 2 critical energy infrastructure facilities were damaged. And in Chernihiv Oblast, rolling blackouts have been in place for almost 10 days or even more, just to reduce strain on the energy system. And as you've mentioned before, repair efforts in the area remain extremely difficult due to ongoing shelling, constant strikes, and services, as far as I know, they were unable to begin work today for that very reason. And as a result, many residents are still without electricity.
Now, Chernihiv is not on the front lines. Why is Russia targeting it?
So it's important to understand that the closer a region is to Russia or Belarus, the greater the danger it faces. And Ukrainian air defense has significantly less time to respond to incoming threats in these areas in comparison, for example, to Lviv Oblast, which is in western part of Ukraine. And Chernihiv Oblast is one of such vulnerable regions, easily accessible from Russia, and it also borders Belarus, where Russian weapons are also stationed as far as we know. And for example, attacks, including launches of Shahed-type drones, they are frequently carried out from Belarus as well.
You mentioned the Shahed drones. I understand that most of the damage was done by Russian drones. What are the capabilities right now of the Ukrainian military to protect against those drones?
Air defense of Ukraine remains one of the critical vulnerabilities, I would say, because, there are never enough systems to meet the demand. It also connected to Russia's capabilities that are being increased all the time. I mean, manufacturing capabilities, because the number of drones that are being produced, it increases on a regular basis. And the shortage of Ukraine's air defenses includes both interceptor missiles and launchers, which is why the Ukrainian government continues to call for additional air defense support. And for instance, I talk a lot with Ukrainian soldiers on the ground, and they also confirm a lack of missiles capable of intercepting high-speed targets. Also, I want to add that Russia recently presented and started to use jet-powered drones, so they can be also considered as high-speed targets. And while Ukraine now deploys, for example, interceptor drones, the damage caused by falling debris remains also significant. And unfortunately, there is still no effective protection against this threat, not in Chernihiv Oblast, but not in Kyiv as well, not in any other Ukrainian cities or villages.
You said that the falling debris, that would be from exploded missiles and other weaponry that falls down on folks. Have you been talking with folks in Chernihiv? How are they weathering this onslaught?
Yes, it's quite a difficult, complicated situation. And as far as I know, a lot of people are going to special sites where local authorities, they prepare batteries, some stations where you can charge your phone or, I don't know, even cook food. And a lot of people, they even sleep there because, the weather changes in Ukraine and it becomes colder and colder. That is why people are trying to go to safer places. In Kyiv, for instance, we have metro, but in Chernihiv Oblast, in Chernihiv, the regional center, there is no metro. So people are just trying to to find a safe place. So the situation is quite complicated, but I hope that it will improve soon because Russia can, as in Chernihiv Oblast, attack without stopping, like constant shelling. Or it can direct dozens of missiles at one facility, and it's impossible to intercept everything.
I was in Chernihiv around the first anniversary of the full-scale invasion, and people were trying to rebuild apartments in buildings that had been struck by missiles. And it strikes me that, they might have been struck since then. How are people making the decision about whether they want to rebuild when attacks are ongoing?
Yeah. This is quite interesting. I've read I've read a lot of reports, and I talked to some people on the ground. And this is like this human feeling of just wanting to be at home. That is why people decide to stay in Chernihiv Oblast. That is why people decide to rebuild, to reconstruct their flats. They have history there, and they just want to belong to their land. And that is why a lot of people decide to stay here.
Yeah. We mentioned that the power and heat is out for hundreds of thousands of people. I know that turning central heating on has been delayed in some cities like Lviv. Winter is coming. What is the weather there like now?
I won't say that it's very cold in Ukraine yet, but obviously it's a matter of time. And I really want to emphasize that a lot of houses, for example, we are talking about Chernihiv Oblast, and we've mentioned before that a lot of houses are damaged and people are literally living there without windows and doors in some cases. So the only one thing that that is left is hope, and hope for the better.
Katerina Hodunova reports for the Kyiv Independent.
In Cameroon, they're still waiting for the final results of the recent presidential election. It took place a week and a half ago, but the Election Commission said it would not be rushed as it carries out an accurate count of the votes. Those results are now expected to be announced this weekend. The incumbent in that race is 92-year-old Paul Biya. He served as the president of Cameroon for more than 40 years, making him currently the oldest head of state in the world.
The leading opposition candidate is Issa Chiromi Bakire. He declared himself the winner last week, and he called on Paul Biya to concede. As the wait for a final vote count continues, tensions are rising. Authorities say 20 people have been arrested in connection with protests. They're now facing charges of insurrection and incitement to rebellion. Leaders from the influential Catholic Church are calling for calm ahead of the declaration of election results this weekend.
Coming up, Ha Jin is an acclaimed Chinese-American novelist whose own life took a radical turn after the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. Just ahead, he speaks with us about his new novel that borrows from his own experience. You're listening to The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. One of the most iconic photographs ever taken in China cannot be viewed in China legally. The image is from 1989 in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. It shows a column of tanks in single file on a wide boulevard. They've stopped in their tracks because one man stands still in their path, the first tank just a few feet from him. The Tank Man photo, as it's come to be known, is, for people all over the world, emblematic of the Tiananmen Square massacre. But in China, it's banned by the government.
That photo and the official suppression of this chapter in Chinese history is the basis for a new book out today by acclaimed novelist Ha Jin. Looking for Tank Man is the story of a university student from China who first learns about the deadly Tiananmen crackdown only after she arrives in the U.S. to study at Harvard. The novel drew inspiration from the author's own experience, as Ha Jin explained to me this week in our Boston studio. Here is that conversation. Ha Jin, welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So this photo that the title of your book references, Looking for Tank Man, this photo has been banned in China. Why?
It is a problematic photo. In the beginning, people believe, I still believe, that it was staged by the Chinese propaganda apparatus because this was a stage to show the leniency of the military to the civilians.
So some people believe this was staged by the Chinese government to show we're not running over this protester.
Yes, in fact, the crew was praised for stopping without running over this single man. On the other hand, the scene was caught by Western reporters, so suddenly it became a global phenomenon. So it's well beyond the Chinese propaganda officials' control. In fact, ironically, the Central TV in China, they broadcast this scene early on. And then they realized this became global, and they had to ban it.
So your novel presents both of these perspectives of this image as propaganda, that the Chinese government staged this to show leniency to the protesters, and the way Westerners interpreted it as showing defiance, which then Chinese people think it's propaganda for the West and for
manufactured by Western media.
So I was particularly interested in speaking with you about this novel because there's overlapping in your own story. At the time of the Tiananmen Square massacre, you were studying in the U.S., and I've read that what happened there played a part in your decision to stay here after graduate school. Was that a hard decision for you?
Very hard. I was confused because while I had come to the States, I didn't plan to immigrate. So I thought, I would finish my dissertation and return to China. I had a job waiting for me. But after this massacre, my world is basically turned upside down. And I realized China was such a brutal country. I just wouldn't serve a government like that. I was totally disillusioned. Suddenly I realized the country is not a mother, but is a kind of monster eating her own children.
Are you able to go back?
No. So I was blacklisted. In fact, my parents, both of them, when they were very sick, hospitalized, I tried hard to go back to see them, but I was not given a visa. That was the last straw. I told them I would not come for a visa anymore.
This brings me back to your novel. Lulu, the main character, is a PhD candidate. So she learns about Tiananmen. She becomes very interested in the history. She decides to pursue a PhD on the topic. She chooses to write this dissertation about Tiananmen Square before it seems she fully considers the repercussions of that decision and that it might make it impossible for her to return to China. Do you think that's realistic?
Yeah. I do believe. There's a lot of madness in this. We are not always rational. In her case, intuitively she felt she was deeply related or connected to the tragedy. In a way, she is, because she was conceived after that. I think intuitively, even physically, she felt she had to do it. That will show us as a human being.
You painted a relatively nuanced view of the military in this novel. There's a character we meet, a former soldier who was at Tiananmen Square, and he is not repentant about the part he played. But we also hear about soldiers who stalled so that they would not have to go into Tiananmen Square and harm civilians. Can you talk to me more about your portrayal of these different approaches in the military?
This kind of balanced presentation of the military. In fact, even the soldiers, they were surprised. They never thought that they would go in and kill civilians. But given in a situation, everything is out of hand. I want to give a truthful description of the moment, the people caught in the violence. And all those, in fact, there are real people who talk like that, who had the same kind of experience.
I know that you served in the Chinese military as a teenager yourself before you came to the U.S. How much of your experience serving worked its way into this novel?
There are a lot of details, small details. For instance, a lot of troops were moving in, and all the civilians said they are moving in to shell those murderers. But the fact is, the guns, the artillery pieces, they were all under canvas. The barrels, everything, the canvas were not taken off. So that means they were not ready to fight at all. So there are details like those.
I have a craft or style question for you about the voice of your narrator. Lulu, your main character, is very focused, very matter-of-fact, very dedicated to her schoolwork. And the writing itself is very to the point, very straightforward, not a lot of creative flourishes. The dialogue is also straightforward. It reads differently than some of your previous novels. How did you land on her voice?
In fact, it is just I had to spend a lot of time with her. Also, this novel, the nature, this must be a kind of stark story. So the style cannot be lyrical. For instance, in my other books, like Waiting, so there is a kind of lyrical quality in the prose. But for this book, it has to be very matter-of-factly that way.
This read at times like a historical nonfiction. And you've said you wanted this book to help keep what happened at Tiananmen alive. Did you write it with more of a mission than previous books? And thus you were thinking more of making a point, really spelling out the history that made this feel different than previous novels?
Yes, but I have written other novels. For instance, The War Chest is also a historical novel. So there was a lot of research in that too. And there's a different kind of beauty in the craft of fiction. If it is really very, very truthful, based upon reality, so there's a lot of strength in it. So for me, the strength is more important than beauty.
Ha Jin, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Oh, thank you. It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Novelist Ha Jin is a professor at Boston University and has won the National Book Award, among other literary honors. His new novel, Looking for Tank Man, is out today.
You're listening to The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. In France, a former president left his home today and went to prison. Well-wishers cheered for Nicolas Sarkozy in Paris this morning as he left his home to begin serving a 5-year sentence on corruption charges. Last month, a court found him guilty of conspiring to take millions of euros in campaign funds from the late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi.
It is a dramatic fall for the former head of state. Sarkozy says he's requested no privileges during his prison sentence. He told the newspaper Le Figaro that he packed family photos and 3 books, The Count of Monte Cristo and 2 volumes of the biography of Jesus.
That's how the story played out today in France, but how he got here begins in Libya with the dictatorship of Muammar Gaddafi. Jalel Harshoui is a political scientist and an expert on Libya. He spoke with us today from Paris.
There's a long tradition of African dictators funding presidential campaigns or political life in Paris. It wasn't completely unheard of. Those were years where Gaddafi was trying to re-enter the Western world. And by the way, that was a process that had been initiated by the United States primarily before France decided to go in that direction. The idea was to buy goodwill from Western capitals and purchase a new image, be accepted, and kind of erase the 80s, including those terror incidents, including Lockerbie.
Sure enough, shortly after Sarkozy took office in 2007, Gaddafi was welcomed with a state visit to France. He pitched his Bedouin-style tent in a garden near the Élysée Palace. Why was that visit so important to Gaddafi?
To basically show that he had won by sticking to his anti-colonial principles. It was a way for him to show his own population and to the global south in general that he ended up being accepted exactly as he was, without really compromising. So it was an ideological victory of sorts. And of course, a lot of that had been fueled with lots of money because Libya is an oil-rich country, particularly in those years where oil prices were high.
Another part of this quid pro quo required France to re-examine terrorism charges against Gaddafi's brother-in-law, the Libyan intelligence chief, Abdullah al-Senussi. Did that ever happen?
This scandal erupted in 2012. But if you go and examine how the relationship evolved between Sarkozy and Gaddafi, it started like a love affair, but it went sour. Muammar Gaddafi didn't buy a lot of the strategic assets he had promised to buy, like fighter jets and nuclear plants and all kinds of goodies from France. And Sarkozy didn't really deliver on his own promises. So it was not a positive arch, if you will, in terms of how it evolved between 2007 and 2010. The situation just deteriorated. And the person you just mentioned is absolutely key to understanding the verdict that ended up sending Nicolas Sarkozy to jail. What he did with his aides when he visited Tripoli in 2005, right at the beginning when he became interior minister, without informing the rest of the republic. Those three men really wanted to meet the brother-in-law of Muammar Gaddafi. And again, Abdullah Senussi, this gentleman, was not just the head of external intelligence for Muammar Gaddafi. He was also the very person who had been found guilty for organizing a terror attack that killed more than 50 French citizens in the early 90s. And he had been sentenced to death. So the fact that they actually used that trip in Tripoli to go and negotiate a deal with someone that they were not supposed to even speak with, that actually turned out to be the keystone behind the verdict.
Jalel, just as a little context, like in 2006, 2007, what was the reputation of Libya and Gaddafi?
The key event here has nothing to do with France. The impulse, the impetus had come from the George W. Bush administration. In December 2003, we're talking about an event that took place a few months after the invasion of Iraq. Muammar Gaddafi had been very frightened, obviously, and impressed with what had happened to his colleague Saddam Hussein. And he accepted a deal that consisted in dismantling his weapons of mass destruction in December 2003. So when French politicians and the French nation in general started its own rapprochement with Gaddafi, it was because all of that was happening in an atmosphere, in an environment where the U.S. had shown the direction of travel. It was clearly the U.S. that decided that it was okay to accept once again Muammar Gaddafi and accept to let him re-enter the Western world, if you will, in terms of dropping sanctions and sending oil companies back to Libya. And the fact that it was an oil-rich country mattered a lot. And with this kind of acceptance in terms of being able to do business with the big international oil companies and so on and so forth, and of course, people thought that Libya was going to reform, was not going to just rebuild, but also become more liberal, more democratic, and more acceptable, if you will.
Do Libyans care about Nicolas Sarkozy going to jail?
They don't care about it. They don't discuss it. I follow social media, which is a very active arena, and I speak with Libyan citizens every day, east, west, south. Nobody mentions it. People are jaded. People are blasé. They have a very specific opinion. They know, obviously, that Sarkozy is not clean. They remember their previous regime very well. They recognize that it's very, very normal that these kind of behind closed doors deals happened at the time. And the fact that he's going to jail is just pathetic for them, not because it's an injustice, but simply because it just adds to the sadness of the whole history of Libya for the last decade or two.
Jalel Harshawi is an analyst on Libya and contributor at the UK think tank, the Royal United Services Institute. He was describing how Libya was involved in the conspiracy that sent former French President Nicolas Sarkozy to prison today.
The Invictus Games were launched just over a decade ago by the UK's Prince Harry. The games feature disabled veterans from around the world competing in a range of adaptive sports. The competition is the subject of a documentary from a couple years ago on Netflix called Heart of Invictus. Like the Olympics, the city's bid to host, and San Diego is making an effort to bring the 2029 Invictus Games there. From KPBS in San Diego, Andrew Dyer reports.
It's a Wednesday afternoon and a group is playing wheelchair basketball in City Heights. Yes! One of the players is Anthony Pone. He was always a basketball player, but years ago, he lost his right leg in a car accident. The Army veteran thought his sports career was over. That's when he found wheelchair basketball.
I thought that the game was over for me. But when I started to play again, it was like, okay, there's a sport. Okay, it's just competitive, if not more.
Such is the power of sports for people living with disabilities. Prince Harry of Great Britain saw this for himself after deploying to Afghanistan more than a decade ago. In 2014, he launched the Invictus Games. Veterans with disabilities from around the globe compete in what's become a biennial adaptive sport competition. San Diego has its own bid to host the games in 2029.
I think we've got a pretty strong bid.
Andy Solar represents the British American Business Association and is the co-chair of San Diego's bid committee. He says the response to the bid has been good.
It's definitely been the most humbling experience of my life. Everywhere we've gone, we've just been met with positivity, with people that want to do whatever they can to bring the games to San Diego.
Giselle Rama is one of the veteran athletes working to bring the games.
For me, adaptive sports has changed my life. It's given me a community. It's given me, a place to be myself and feel normal.
We met Rama in City Heights with her service dog, Hugo.
You ready to go for lunch? Right?
5 years ago, she was a sailor on the guided missile destroyer USS Fitzgerald. In 2020, her ship was docked across the pier from the USS Bonhomme Richard when it caught fire.
We were actually responding to the fire. I happened to be outside during the second blast, where the force of the blast, threw me back onto the deck of my ship.
Rama's injuries were severe, and she was medically retired from the Navy. Since then, she participated in the Warrior Games, the Defense Department's adaptive sports competition. That earned her a spot on Team USA for this year's Invictus Games in Vancouver.
The secret sauce of the Invictus Games is really hard to, it's easy to describe, but you just have to be there. You have to be there, you have to experience it. And everyone who's has seen the Invictus Games, experienced the Invictus Games, it's very impactful, it's life-changing to them.
I've had many wounded, ill, and injured service members and veterans say to me after we've developed a relationship and trust that our tennis program has saved their lives.
Steve Kappas is the director of the San Diego Wounded Warrior Tennis Program. We caught up with him at the University of San Diego during a college tennis tournament. The retired Navy captain says he's seen firsthand what these sports programs do for veterans.
When the Invictus Games come to San Diego, it will shine a very bright light on the whole world of adaptive sports, and certainly with a specific focus on the military population. I think it's going to help our community in general understand a lot more about what adaptive sports are about.
Anthony Pone, the man injured in a car accident, says hosting the games would mean more opportunities for him to give back.
I'm happy that I'm alive because there's an alternative, and I almost met that alternative during my car accident. So every day I'm alive, I breathe deep, and if I see somebody in a position just like me, it's all about sharing my experiences and and hope they're motivated by them so they can get on their journey as well.
San Diego isn't a shoo-in to host the games. Other finalists are Denmark, Nigeria, Italy, South Korea, and Ukraine. Solar says the bid needs community commitment and financial commitment to make it to the final two cities in December. The 2029 host city will be announced next summer. For The World, I'm Andrew Dyer in San Diego.
Japan has a new prime minister. Her name is Sonai Takaichi. She is the first woman to serve as prime minister in Japan's history. Takaichi is the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party that's been in power since the end of World War II. She's known as an ultra-conservative politician, and this line stands out in her bio. She was once a drummer in a heavy metal band. The historic first female prime minister has already earned attention, but Jeffrey Hall says that does not mean Takaichi is a champion of gender issues. Hall is a lecturer in Japanese politics at Kanda University of International Studies, just outside Tokyo. We spoke when it was late this evening in Tokyo.
The mainstream media has also focused on this historic moment, but people who are more progressive, feminists, people on the left, are not welcoming her premiership. There's a famous novelist who once referred to Takaichi as an honorary man because she's so conservative on gender issues that it doesn't even really matter if a woman is prime minister. She's not going to do anything to advance women's status in Japanese society. So I think there's a pessimism among feminists about the meaning of her being prime minister. But there is also maybe an importance in just having the reality that there is a woman as prime minister in this country. And so that young people growing up, they can see, oh, yes, it's possible. If I'm a young girl in Japan, I can become prime minister. That kind of does exist as a thing. But in terms of gender issues, she is extremely conservative.
Let's get to the politics. I mean, she's described as ultra-conservative, but what does that mean in the context of Japanese politics?
Well, in Japanese politics, within the conservative party of the LDP, which is a big tent conservative party, there are some center-left figures, and then there are some figures much, much farther to the right. Very, very nationalistic, very, very hawkish people with views on World War II history that most Americans would find shocking. And she is one of those people in the ultra-conservative side.
Let's talk about the challenges that she's facing, starting with Pacific regional tensions around China. I've seen Takaichi described as a China hawk. What does that mean in terms of policy and what we're expecting from her?
It means that she very much talks about the threat of China. For many years, she's talked about it, and she also sees Chinese residents in Japan. They're one of the largest populations of immigrants in Japan. She sees every single one of them as a potential enemy of the country, a spy or someone who will cooperate with the Chinese military. She has said that Chinese people shouldn't be allowed to buy property in Japan, shouldn't be allowed to have houses. So she very much sensationalizes the threat posed by China and Chinese people. Of course, most security experts agree that there is a threat from China, but they wouldn't characterize every single Chinese resident of Japan as a potential spy. And she wants, as one of her policies, to pass a tougher anti-espionage law. Some people in Japan see this as a dangerous attack on freedom of speech.
There's also U.S. tariffs under Trump and relations with the White House. What do U.S.-Japanese relations look like with Prime Minister Takaichi and President Trump as the two leaders?
I think that it'll be very much a continuation of the status quo, maybe even a little bit better, because she has this reputation as the successor to Abe's legacy. So Trump has in his mind this idea of Abe as his very, very good friend. And so somebody who is so strongly linked to Abe might get a much more favorable treatment from Trump, although I don't expect him to get rid of the tariffs that exist right now. But Takaichi will be meeting with Trump later this month, and I think she'll follow the plan that Abe followed. She'll follow the plan that other prime ministers followed, which is to be very polite to Trump and to not fight him publicly, to be very subtle when they disagree and not try to start a confrontation.
A lot on her agenda. What is the biggest unknown here for Takaichi's premiership and for Japan?
I think the biggest unknown is if she can really pull off long-term leadership under this new quasi-coalition. It's uncharted territory for Japan, this new coalition that was just created in the last 2 weeks. And since the death of Abe, these prime ministers barely last a year in office. And so there's perhaps a risk that she will become another revolving door politician in charge of Japan. And when they call their next election, it could be a huge risk for Takaichi. It could be an even worse loss than her predecessor lost.
That's Jeffrey Hall from the Kondo University of International Studies outside Tokyo, speaking with us about Japan's first female prime minister, Sonai Takaichi.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Picture a white dog with red spots, floppy ears, and a taste for adventure. This is Pimpa, a beloved Italian children's comic character, and she is celebrating her 50th birthday this year. She's sort of Italy's answer to Paddington Bear. Pimpa is the star of her own comic and animated cartoon. Danny Mitzman and her daughter, Ariana, sent our partners at DW this tribute.
That is my daughter and her friends singing the Pimpa theme tune because everybody grows up with Pimpa.
Oh, yeah, everybody. You can't not grow up with Pimpa. I mean, that's just unfair and sad.
Who is Pimpa to you then?
Oh, Pimpa was like my best friend.
Pimpa is a joyful, friendly talking dog, white with big red spots and very long ears. She lives with Armando, a kind man with a big hat and a bigger moustache.
Il prato è ingiallito.
Perché non ha piovuto. Ora.
In Pimpa's world, everything and everyone can talk. Other animals, trees and flowers, food and milk, the sun and the clouds, even the Hoover and the armchair.
Tu vai in bagno e di alla lavatrice di venire qui.
Eccomi!
Almost unknown outside Italy, Pimpa truly is a national icon. Her creator is Francesco Tullio Altan, a well-known satirical cartoonist who's now in his 80s, known professionally simply as Altan.
I did drawings for my daughter, who was about 2 at the time. She would ask me to draw her various things, and one of them was the character of this little dog. We borrowed a family friend's nickname, and that's how she got her name.
At their stand at Bologna Children's Book Fair, Altan's surrounded by Pimpa comic collections, merchandise, and 2 new books to celebrate her 50th birthday. He's also surrounded by a swarm of adult fans who grew up reading Pimpa. By 1987, Pimpa had her own monthly magazine and television cartoon series. When I ask Altan about Pimpa's enduring popularity, he answers with endearing humility.
Frankly, I don't know. I think maybe since the character was born without being commissioned by a publisher, it's maintained the spontaneity or simplicity of approach that really works for children. Pimpa's readers are very young, and over the last 50 years, little children haven't changed so much.
Nor has Pimpa's world, which is refreshingly tech-free. There's a computer and a TV, but no mobiles, only an old-fashioned phone with a dial. Plus 7 pages of simple classic kids' activities and games, like Spot the Difference, all created by Altan himself. A perfect mix my daughter Ariana adored. We had an annual subscription, and I remember Ariana's excitement every time a new issue arrived.
They had 2 little stories in them and a bedtime story for your parents to read to you. And at the end there was a game and a page full of kids' drawings.
I think you learnt to read with Pimpa.
Yeah, I did, because at one point Dad gave up on reading them to me. So I had to learn to read them. Every so often I still read them.
Ariana's friends also have fond Pimpa memories, especially twins Melissa and Rebecca. Melissa remembers the excitement of seeing her drawing published in the gallery section. She tells me her grandma always bought it for her and she really loved reading all the stories. Rebecca recalls feeling happy whenever she read the comic. She says Pimpa taught her kindness through the way she always helped her animal friends. And she loved the tear-out constructions, especially the flower, which her grandma still has.
E la Pimpa correva. In the cartoons, I also used to love it when she would go really fast. She would run or go somewhere really fast, and then her spots would fly off and go behind, trail behind her, and then when she stopped, they'd go back on her. It was really fun, and yeah, I think Pimpa's really special because I grew up with Pimpa.
Altan reckons he's written around 1,200 stories about Pimpa and her friends, often inspired by those around him. A new character, a little yellow duck called Olivia, arrived 18 years ago with the birth of his granddaughter. Although he's never run out of stories, I wonder if he ever thinks about retiring.
Sometimes I think I could stop, but knowing there are still quite a few children who wait for her and who don't consider her as a character to read about, but as a friend and a playmate, I think it would be a horrible thing to tell them she's gone. So I keep going as long as I can. I'll keep going.
Armando è uscito. Ha detto che quando torna farà le pulizie di primavera.
The stories usually follow a formula where Pimpa goes off for an adventure, then comes home to tell Armando all about it. When I asked Arianna's friends who their favourite character was, without hesitation, there was a unanimous
Armandone.
Ma perché Armandone?
Because Armandone gives a certain sense of security. He's there. He observes everything. He doesn't interfere much. He lets her do things, pretends to believe all the stories she tells him. I think he's a good father figure.
Non ingombrante.
Altan says Pimpa's not designed to be educational and his role isn't to teach. That said, does he want his young readers to learn something?
Sì, che imparino a guardare le cose in un certo
To learn to look at things in a certain way, perhaps, yes, but definitely not rules. Curiosity, for sure. To stimulate them, show them the possibility of an adventure, whether it's real or not. That's important.
È importante.
Pimpa's tireless curiosity is matched by her respectful treatment of everyone and everything, and her spontaneous kindness and generosity. It's a world away from the satirical political cartoons Altan draws for newspapers.
Non so se è il preferito, però.
I don't know if it's my favorite world, but it's very useful for my mental balance. Sometimes, when reality becomes too disgusting, I take refuge there, and I feel better because Pimpa's world is the world I wish existed.
A world which adults who grew up reading Pimpa also continue to love.
Gira gira il mondo, tipo gira il mondo anche la Pimpa. Non me lo ricordo.
Danny Mitzman's story aired on DW's Inside Europe podcast.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. Find us online anytime at theworld.org. Also, check us out on YouTube, where you'll find more of our original reporting. It's also where you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. We will be right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. macfound.org. And by FJC, a foundation of philanthropic funds serving the nonprofit sector with donor-advised funds, fiscal sponsorship, bridge lending, and more. FJC.org. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX. More information at theworld.org.